Welcome to Straight from the CPA's Mouth. I'm Chris Pilger, Director of Member Communications and Recruitment at CPA Alberta, and I'll be your host for today's show. My guest today is Jason Ding, and we're going to be discussing conflict, science, and biotechnology, and building a career around your interests.
Did you hear that head office is implementing new diversity and inclusion
Less than 10% of C-suite positions at Canada's 100 companies need to be more socially responsible.
Big data represents a potential windfall of $30 billion for Canada by 2020.
Canada will do a comprehensive review of its tax system.
70% of Albertans say the economy is too dependent on oil and gas.
Filter out the noise. Hear it straight from the CPA's mouth.
Thanks for being with us, Jason. Why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about you and a little bit about your CPA career?
You bet. Thanks very much, and excited to be here. So a little bit about my career. I actually started off with a genetics degree, and I worked in the labs in the summers, as most science students do. And then I had a really unique opportunity. So at the time, Alberta Heritage Foundation for Medical Research, so HFMR, was around, and they had an internship program tied with CBC Radio. So over the course of that summer, I had a chance to meet people, talk about really neat science stories, communicate science, through radio. So I went back to the lab, the science lab, the year after, and at that point decided, nope, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I really enjoyed talking to people, and actually fell into accounting. And so I ended up articling with a national firm, and then ended up making the switch actually into transactions. That was a ton of fun, the transactional piece, and I spent about 5 years in that space with Deloitte, and then left, and ended up in a really unique role as an executive in residence at an organization in town called Tech Edmonton, which is a incubator accelerator tied with the university. So think about all the patents and all the research that comes out of university research and on campus, and those bits of IP and intellectual property and patents being spun into companies. And so helping those companies with raising capital and transactions and supporting them. Then got a call, actually only about 2.5 years ago, from Deloitte to come back. And currently I lead the corporate finance M&A transactions practice in the Edmonton office, and nationally the corp finance group for life sciences and healthcare.
Tell me a little bit about, you kind of glossed over it really briefly. So what was the attraction to accounting? And was there a conscious thought that maybe I can meld these two passions of mine?
Yeah, it was. So I was stuck. I wasn't sure that I necessarily wanted to go back into media, but at the same time, wasn't really sure what I could do with a science degree and what would come next. And fortunately, I had a very good friend of mine who he and I were working together, who had actually done a science degree thinking about pharmacy, and he ended up going into accounting a year ahead of me. And so I had the opportunity to join him at a couple of Meet the Firm nights when he was recruiting as part of his after-degree program, and had a chance to meet some firms, have a chance to talk about career progression with them, and I was hooked, actually. And so once I finished up my science degree, I went straight into an after-degree in business and went right into accounting.
And when did you realize that maybe those two kind of passions and things of yours weren't mutually exclusive, but that you could take that science background and make it part of your CPA career?
One of the best things about public practice, and I love my time in public practice on the accounting side, was the opportunity to experience and meet so many different clients in different sets. I would say my first year, as a student, I really sort of followed, the path of, whatever sort of came my way, that's what I worked on. But as I saw the breadth of companies that our firm serviced, I made the decision actually to put my hand up and say, look, I'm really interested in tech. I'm really interested in life science projects. And they were really good to me. Actually, they sent me out to Vancouver for about 6 months to work an internship there. And as part of that work, I had the chance to work on a couple of IPOs, secondary offerings, all of the accounting pieces related to that, and audit pieces related to that. And when I came back, I said, I want to do more of this, and the opportunity came up at Deloitte to do more transactional related work.
Great. It's such a privilege when you can, and I'm sure it adds to your satisfaction that you have these two pieces of you that you're able to fulfill.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's definitely, it creates a niche for me around, where I can work and really apply two different sets of education that I've been able to get. And that's been fantastic. The personal satisfaction of not just, being able to apply the knowledge, but I love life sciences and healthcare. I love the impact that industry has on people and people's lives. And then to be able to do that and marry that with my, CPA background has been really fantastic.
So you serve on the boards of Vaxalta, the Canadian Entrepreneurs in Life Sciences, TELUS World of Science. You talked about your time at Tech Edmonton. So you clearly have a big interest in the field. You've talked about that. So, biotechnology is kind of a growing business, I think, across the world. And I think we're trying to develop a hub kind of here in Alberta and in Edmonton. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of where you see this industry going in the future?
Yeah, and my time with each of those organizations gives me something a bit different in terms of perspective on how the landscape is changing. So Vaxalta is a very unique company. They're an animal vaccine R&D company, one of the companies that I helped spin out of the university. And they are working on vaccines that'll help with protecting the food chain. And so seeing sort of, cutting edge, brand new technology that's being developed and helping that company, as a board member has been really rewarding. TELUS World of Science, amazing in, education and really advocating for science with students. And then CEL's completely different. So Canadian Entrepreneurs in Life Science, that's a Canadian expat organization in Silicon Valley, in California, focused on helping Canadian companies soft land in California. So whether that's raising capital, getting an education, meeting large pharma companies in the U.S. to help with mentorship, or help with supporting companies in their commercialization path. Having Canadians in California supporting Canadian companies is a really neat initiative. And so that's been also rewarding. And so, as the landscape continues to change in Canada, there are lots and lots of tools and lots of resources available to entrepreneurs and students and inventors. And so it's just accessing those different portals.
And do you think that, do you see this industry continuing to grow, especially here in Alberta, and diversification of the economy has been talked about my lifetime, but do you think that's one promising path?
Yeah, definitely. So heavy investment right now, certainly in Alberta, around AI, so artificial intelligence and machine learning. And there's a real opportunity for health and some of these tools and digital health, we'll call it, to really make a resurgence here. I mean, we have an amazing resource in Alberta, having been one of the largest sort of consolidators of health regions in the country. As a result of that, that's created a data warehouse to allow us to really, take 4 million people within one data set and to be able to mine that data for, interesting opportunities, either, to treat diseases or to look at genetic patterns or to impact, how care is provided. The opportunity in Alberta really is second to none. And so a lot of what's happening right now is, taking that asset and trying to figure out how to properly use it so that we can advance care in the province. And so, we're seeing this model being looked at by other provinces. We're seeing partnerships in Alberta with large pharma companies, large digital health companies, in being able to access that data to be able to support really next generation health support.
Do you think the general public realizes how much these sorts of industries touch their daily life? And do you think, kind of secondarily to that there's some misconceptions around the field?
Yeah, probably. I don't think I have a good answer to that question. Healthcare touches our lives in so many different ways. And again, those data assets right now in Alberta are still relatively disparate, and a lot of the work right now that's being done is how do we take all of those assets and actually put them together so that we can mine it properly. And this is happening all over the place. And in terms of what the public understands of what's happening with that, I don't know that all of that is necessarily coming out. I think people focus on their immediate healthcare, their immediate needs, and the bigger picture sometimes gets lost in all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet it does make a difference, as you said. It's making a difference to people's lives kind of on a daily basis. Are there opportunities? Do you think you're heavily in the space? Do you think there's opportunities for CPAs even more in the field and into the future?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that's happening right now is, and of course I work on the merger and acquisition side, and so we see a lot of transactions that happen where international investment dollars flow into Canada to acquire companies, to invest in companies, to help companies grow. And what we're seeing right now is there's a lot of noise, in the market around recession talk, right? So global recession. What happens if there is a global recession from a due diligence perspective? Probably one of the first questions our clients are getting asked as part of a sale process is, how did you perform in the last recessions? Because investors are conscious about, making an investment today and what happens with that investment as part of that, if a recession happens. The interesting thing about healthcare is it's generally seen as recession-proof or counter-cyclical to, a market downturn. And so we're seeing a flood of capital come into healthcare right now. So the investment dollars, the interest in rolling up healthcare, and Canada is relatively fragmented around healthcare. The investment that's currently being made in healthcare is tremendous. And the number of new investment firms, private equity firms, family offices, and portfolio decisions being made around healthcare is growing right now, and so we're very busy with transactions in the space currently.
And is that where you think you provide the most value with your CPA background? Is in that transaction space?
Yeah, and it's and that's just for me, and that's a personal decision that I've made. I love the transaction space, and it's not that I didn't enjoy my time in audit. But transactions and M&A is really what gets me going, and gets me out of bed in the morning is getting onto that next transaction. So I'll give you a bit of an example. We worked on a deal with a company that had basically a phase 3, so a drug, a multiple sclerosis drug in phase 3 clinical trials, and that product was going to be life-changing for a number of patients. And you could tell from the people that had worked in that company all the way through that, the impact that was going to have to their patients, to their family, some of their family members, was going to be tremendous. And so we assisted them with commercializing the product by licensing that particular drug to a company called Eli Lilly, so a large pharmaceutical company based in the U.S. And when that deal was done, everyone was relieved, exhilarated, excited about having concluded this fantastic transaction that was going to make such a big difference to people. And I couldn't get away from that feeling. And it's not that, other parts of what we can do as CPAs is not valuable. It was just, for me, that's really what caught my attention, my focus, and what really drove me to doing transactional work.
This is a really specific question, but what would surprise people about the process of getting a drug to market?
How expensive it is, I think, and how long it takes. So one of the things that people don't necessarily understand is that patents actually, to get a patent actually is not that expensive relative to the cost of developing the drug. So the patent actually comes up quite early in the process. You've developed, let's say, a new chemical entity that you think is going to have an impact in cancer. That gets patented right away, because what you want to do is you want to protect it and make sure that no one else, has access to that invention. From there, it's 12 to 14 years to get the drug to market, assuming all clinical trials are successful, and a cost of about $2 billion is the last estimate.
Wow.
What people also don't understand is that patent life is 20 years. So you basically, at the end of, let's say, 13 years of getting a drug through that process, you have 7 years basically to recoup that cost and to make your profit. And then the day that you are genericized and your patent expires, you have 8 to 10 generics ready to go to replace you, and your market share falls away and your pricing falls away quite drastically. What people also don't understand is that it's probably a 5% success rate from beginning to end. Right. So out of 20 drugs, 19 of them will fail. And you'll have put in a very, very significant amount of money in order to get to that point. So basically, to get to the end, 20 years, you'll have tried, 20 times, 19 will have failed. $2 billion to get all the way through, so you wouldn't have spent $2 billion on each of them, but a very substantial cost for all your failures, plus the full $2 billion to get to market. And then, it's quite expensive as well to manufacture, to distribute globally. And so yeah, drug prices are high, absolutely. But it's also very, very challenging to get to the end.
Absolutely. And how can CPAs help in that process?
Yeah, so the transactional element actually within the life sciences space is quite important. So raising capital. For a small biotech, even if they're able to raise the $2 billion to get to the end, to build out a global sales force, a global team, manufacture, that to that scale is almost impossible. Which is why the licensing exit is the most common exit for just about every biotech company that's developing a new drug. They need the resources of a Pfizer or Roche and Eli Lilly and Merck to help them get to the end, right? And so most will take the drug to the end of phase 2. They don't want to raise the next sort of $500 million or more to get to, through phase 3 and to the end. And so they partner with a large pharma company who basically leases, for all intents and purposes, or licenses, the intellectual property and says, we get exclusive use of this drug and we'll finish development and we'll take that from you. All the way along, though, that biotech company is, going to need tax support, SR&ED, tax credits in Canada, audits to support, their investors, probably a go public transaction at some point. And so, there's a lot actually that CPAs can do all the way across that entire spectrum and life cycle.
And I think you mentioned it earlier, and even kind of that when you were talking about all the data, and even that data analytics is something that CPAs are well equipped, and I think becoming increasingly well equipped to handle.
Yeah, definitely. And so, new tools and new processes, new sort of thoughts around how to manage that data and mine it for insights is something that CPAs are excellent at.
Yeah. Circle back a bit more to your career, and you've talked about this a bit, but what are kind of the favorite aspects of what you do?
So we, within our practice, actually focus only on private companies. So when we talk to business owners about an exit or succession planning, it is different than working with public companies where, the singular focus of a public company transaction typically is, value for the shareholder, and that's it. So we recently, for instance, did a transaction, quite a large one, with a private company owner. We received multiple offers, and along with those multiple offers, there was language and commitments being made around, how the legacy would be treated, how the staff would be retained, how they would bring the business forward. And the owner in that particular case basically decided that he wasn't going to take the highest offer, the highest price, that he was going to take the one that fit his value set the best. And that was amazing to watch. Yeah. And really was, for me, one of the transactions where I really, really enjoyed watching someone basically faced with this decision around sort of his values and dollars, and decided basically that he would land on the value set, which was, again, fantastic to watch. So I love that. I love, the team aspect, and that I think that's everywhere and anywhere with CPAs. We've got a great team, and so working with them every day is just a joy. So,
we talked about how lucky you've been to be able to meld those two passions, but do you think that's unique to you, or do you think that's something broadly that a CPA designation offers?
I think it's about following your passion. I mean, it's definitely luck. There's an element of luck, but there's also an element of really understanding, what do you care about? For instance, friends, one individual I'm thinking of particularly, got her CPA designation, but was just love fashion. And so she ended up leaving the firm and accounting behind and went actually to a big fashion school in the US, came back and is now, marrying those same skills, her love for fashion and her accounting background together. Another friend of mine is passionate about sports, and so has done a ton of work, again, with his CPA, but also doing international sports competitions. and finding ways to either audit or be involved with the accounting of major sports events. And so it's really about taking the platform, I think, that is accounting and finance and everything that you've learned, I think, through that process of getting your designation, whether it's in a firm or an industry, but marrying that up with what you really love doing, and I mean that there's tons of opportunity for that.
And so what advice would you have to, say, a student who might be listening on kind of the steps they could take to have that sort of opportunity and career?
A big part of it is understanding yourself, and then just being courageous around putting your hand up and saying, this is what I love doing. This is a big part of my life. My career will be better if I take these various pieces and put them together. And I'm going to enjoy my clients more. I'm going to enjoy my work more. And that's the viewpoint I've taken in terms of moving that forward.
Great. So our last podcast guest left us with the following question. What is your approach to resolving conflict? So, what is your approach to resolving conflict?
So I also glossed over a very short, but probably the most important stint I did in my career. So when I was a business student for the 2 years, I was also lucky enough to take on a part-time role at the university as an ombudsman. So I was a student ombudsman for the University of Alberta for a 2-year period. And during that time, they basically required us to get certified in interest-based negotiation and mediation.
Wow.
So I had 2 years of training supporting to support students in all sorts of things that came up as an ombudsperson at the university, and that really shaped how I communicated with students, but then with clients, with staff members, with team members throughout my career. And my approach to conflict actually is listening. So. I was just joking with my wife the other day. We love watching the show Suits, but you could make a drinking game out of every time they say, before you say anything, and then they go into a tirade and then drama ensues. If they just sort of took a moment and said, give me your point of view, help me understand why this matters to you, it would have made all the difference, and it would be a far less dramatic show. But it. It certainly, the level of conflict that you see, on a day-to-day basis, even in the workplace, would be far less. When we talk about transactions and we talk about negotiating, everyone thinks that, price is everything, and price is important as part of our negotiations. But actually, if you sit back and talk to owners around, what matters to you, and why is someone on the other side of the conversation taking a different position? If you ask the right questions around why that position is important, how are they seen, let's say, by their peers or their bosses, which is why they're taking a certain position, and whether or not we can get them that while getting what it is that we need, we can get to a very successful resolution that works for both sides and a true win-win.
What do you think the differences are between people who are good at handling conflict and coming up with a resolution and those who aren't?
So the listening piece is a part of it, and so I often find that individuals are very quick to stick to positions. So this is what I want, without delving into the why. And so taking the time in terms of preparation, and people who, let's say, prepare for those types of conversations, and being really genuine about this is why this matters to me, makes a big difference to a successful outcome of a negotiation. I think the second piece is creativity. So once you sort of get through the willingness to listen piece, the other aspect of it is being creative about solutions. So if this is really what you care about, and this is what we care about, actually there's a couple of different ways that we can attack this problem. And it doesn't have to be a, column A, column B only solution. It's, how do we find a way to mix that up and make sure that we're both getting what we want? So yeah, I would say, between listening and being creative, and caring. I mean, maybe that's the underpinning of everything, is you have to care about the other person on the other side. If you don't care about the person on the other side, you're not going to listen, and you're not going to want to get creative around finding that win-win solution.
I had a great example of a creative solution to a conflict I saw the other day, which was down in Calgary, where it was a real estate transaction. Someone was buying a house, and they were $3,000 apart, the buyer and the seller. And the seller discovered that the buyer was a former pro hockey player, and he happened to be a goaltender in a men's league. So he said, "Why don't we do a shootout best of 11 for the $3,000 difference?" So that's what they did. They rented an ice time and they had a shootout. And it turns out that the seller, so the beer league goalie, came out on top. So he got his extra $3,000. But creative resolution to conflict for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We did one transaction where the son of the seller. So we were at this particular transaction. We were on the buy side. The son of the seller was on an industry association. So we were going to acquire the company, and the assumption on the side of the buyer who was selling was that her son was going to have to leave the industry association. She mentioned in a conversation where she said, "It's really too bad. My son, is the vice chair, is going to be chair next year. Once this transaction happens, unfortunately, he's not going to be able to fulfill that." And so we knew going into the bidding process that we did not have the highest bid by price, but we put in there that our CEO would not step into that role, that we would allow her son to take on that chair role, and actually the past chair role as well. And we ended up winning that process because we listened, because we heard what was important, and it wasn't, again, just price. It was also, what was good for her family.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to kind of your earlier point and about values. You took the time to care and understand that the values were important there, and so I think that's a really good example. Can there be such a thing as positive or good conflict, particularly in the workplace? Do you think it ever can lead to something?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, conflict is, a great way to look at conflict is it's an opportunity to arrive at a better place, right? There's a difference in opinion. There's a difference of sort of what individuals want. But if you can resolve that in a true win-win, actually both people get further ahead and you get a very positive result out of that conflict. And so, if everyone is caring, takes the time to listen and is creative around those solutions, you actually, I think, every time can get ahead with a positive solution that works for everyone.
Yeah, so sometimes I think in a workplace, there's a tendency, if there's no conflict, that's great, but it might not be, because it might be symptomatic of a bigger issue or a problem where people aren't comfortable speaking up or going against the grain or sharing creativity, and it's just, well, we'll just go along with the ride.
Yeah, avoiding conflict is not a great thing. I mean, things never get resolved, and they hang there. No one's really speaking their mind around what it is they want, or someone's caving into everything, right? They're not communicating what it is that they want, and someone is maybe a little bit more aggressive about it, and there's an imbalance in the relationship. If there's an opportunity for everyone to engage equally, and again, to level that playing field and make sure that everyone feels heard, conflict is a great thing, assuming that we can get to the right resolution in each case.
Yeah, and I think those underpinnings, the way you've laid them out, are just perfect and really would lead to successful, positive resolution in any situation. Jason, it's been great chatting with you. I'm really glad you could take the time to do this. It was just a fascinating discussion, so thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It's great.
Straight from the CPA's Mouth is centered around Alberta CPAs discussing everything from leadership to finance to education. So before we end this episode, Jason, could you pose a question for our next guest to tackle?
Absolutely. So what I want to hear about is, from your next guest, what is the wisest thing that you have ever heard someone say?
I think that's a fascinating question. I look forward to hearing those. Before I wrap up, do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share?
No, this was great. A ton of fun. Thanks so much for the invite. Really enjoyed it.
There you have it, everyone. Straight from the CPA's mouth. You'll have to wait until December to hear the next CPA talk about wise things they've heard, however. For those of you who don't know, next month is Financial Literacy Month. To explore all things related to financial literacy, Straight from the CPA's Mouth will be taking a break from our usual episode format and releasing special episodes during the month of November. In the meantime, again, thank you, Jason, for taking the time to be with us today. Thanks to all of you for listening, and be sure to check out our special upcoming episodes on financial literacy. And remember to join our subscriber list in order to get access to exclusive content. You can sign up and get more information at cpaalberta.ca/podcast.
Straight from the CPA's Mouth is brought to you by the CPA Education Foundation. The CPA Education Foundation is the charitable arm of the Alberta CPA profession, providing up to $1.2 million each year in support of business and accounting education in the province. This podcast is just one of many resource materials available through the HESI CPA Knowledge Centre. This virtual hub features Alberta CPAs sharing their unique perspective and vast expertise on topics and issues such as leadership, finance, entrepreneurship, and more. Visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation for more information on the HESI CPA Knowledge Centre and to learn how Alberta CPAs inspire success.